get 1 minute, John.
Well, actually, you got 43 seconds.
All out.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Mike.
How are you, Michael?
I'm
Hey,
good.
Mike.
Michael.
Hey, Marco. How you doing?
Good, good.
Blast from the past.
He's enjoying his last few days with us.
We are live.
We're going to start in 3 minutes. Marco? Gail can't get in. She said she can hear us, but she can't get in. Does that mean she's on YouTube and not WebEx?
Well, I see her in WebEx.
Okay.
So if she can hear us through WebEx, something with her video, she didn't allow it. Do you know if she's on the browser or did she say anything?
Is she muted, do you know?
She's not muted, no.
All right. We're going to start in 2 minutes.
There's Gail.
Gail?
Yes.
Okay. All right. We're going to start in Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Special Education Reopening Parent Webinar. My name is Rob Mancusi. I am your proud Executive Director of Special Education and Special Programs for the Fairfield Public Schools. Tonight, we're going to attempt to answer several questions that we've received via email and that we've pulled off of social media. You'll also have an opportunity to add additional comments or questions in the chat box. If we do not have an opportunity to get through all of your questions tonight, we will answer them through an FAQ format that will be posted this week. With us tonight, excuse me. With us tonight, while I'm having some technical difficulties here, switching slides. Marco. I can't get this to go.
Click on the slide itself on the PowerPoint, and then try using your keys.
All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, with us here tonight is myself, Rob Mancusi. We also have Colleen DC, our Executive Director of Personnel and Legal Services. She is serving as the co-moderator. We also have Christy Vitale, who is the one who is responsible for putting this event together in a conversation that she had. She thought it would be a great idea. We agreed. So Christy is our SEPTA president, and she's also co-moderating with Colleen DC. We have Gail Donowitz, who is our coordinator of special education for Walter Fitzgerald Campus and the Community Partnership Program. Chantel Palumbo joins us as the coordinator of special education for Fairfield Ludlow High School. Michael DeStefano, the coordinator of Fairfield Ward High School, is with us, along with Jonathan Goodison, who's the middle school special education coordinator, and Linda Jean Schwartz, the coordinator of special education for the elementary levels. Kristen Bruno, who is our early childhood special education coordinator, unfortunately had something that she could not reschedule, so she wasn't able to be with us tonight. But she had input into the development of our plans, and we will be scheduling a specific webinar just for ECC parents. Also on the call tonight are Dr. Zakia Parrish, our Executive Director of Operations and Processes, and Dr. James Zadrzanchik will be joining us. He is our Executive Director of Instruction, Curriculum, and Assessment. Before we get into questions, I wanted to review some reopening priorities of the district, because we are in a little bit of a different situation than we were when we were entering distance learning when we were closed back in March. So our priority is to provide students with disabilities a free and appropriate education with the intent to protect the health and safety of students, families, and staff because of this pandemic. Public schools, as you know, through the state guidance documents, we have not been granted any waivers of IDEA requirements. So IEP services in your children's IEPs are mandated to be delivered. Federal law, however, does allow some flexibility in determining how to meet the individualized needs of students receiving special education and related services, and that will be particularly important as we as students, receive receive services either remotely or through a hybrid plan at this time. And our hybrid learning and temporary opt-in remote learning, we will be utilizing a 50-50 synchronous and asynchronous learning model. What that means is a minimum of 50% of IEP services will be delivered live in person or live video instruction. That I say minimum because we're not going to hold folks back who want to go above that 50%. limit, minimal limit. So, and then we'll do the 50% asynchronous, which is the posting the activities on Google Classroom. And then also a big part of our plan, our reopening plan, and also a priority in the state plan is re-engaging students and families with their school communities and supporting the social emotional learning of students, families, and staff throughout the district. Just to speak a little bit to that before we could get right into questions is we know how difficult it has been for our families and our students since March. We know how difficult distance learning has been for so many of our students. And we also know how isolated many felt, how anxiety in folks has increased significantly since this pandemic began. It still does. We still worry about the safety of our children, of our loved ones. So all that goes into planning a reopening where we all can deliver services to students that they need, and do that in a safe manner. You will be hearing from us throughout the school year on social emotional learning initiatives and re-engagement efforts that will be our priority, not only as we reopen, but as we go throughout the year. And whether we are in remote, live, or whether we are, in a hybrid model for an extended period. One of the most exciting parts of the re-engagement process or meeting the social emotional learning needs is we're going to be implementing a universal screener to try to measure how traumatizing this experience was for our students and families, and then develop individualized re-engagement plans and support plans for students and families based on the degree to which they were negatively impacted by this pandemic over the 5 months that we've been out of school. These are the top questions that we received. There's 38 of them. So we have about an hour and 20 minutes to go through them. I will do my best to get through all 38. These were sent out earlier today, and these were the questions that we received through email or we received on or saw on social media. And we tried to put them together, get them out to you today so you knew you could see if your question was on here or not. And then if you have additional questions, you can put them into the chat box. If we don't get to them, like I said before, we will be producing an FAQ and we will get that posted out this week. So question number 1 is, will additional live in-person learning be offered to CLC students? The answer to that is, each special ed student obviously has an IEP. Each special ed student's IEP is individualized to his or her needs. So on a case-by-case basis, we will be determining who services. The state has been very clear in its guidance, in one of its addendums, addendum 3 of its reopening guidance. It gave some districts some clear guidance for, considering or providing special considerations for in-person supports for students with high needs. And students for high needs, as they are defined by the state, are students that need a lot of one-to-one or one-to-two support from adults, students who need support feeding, students who need support, toileting and all other adaptive skills, students who require a lot of individualized, discrete trial type of instruction. They may have significant behaviors that interfere with their progress. Students who were significantly disengaged during the distance remote learning platform this fall. And students with high needs are also defined as students who districts often are able to program for students with high needs in districts, but these are the students who districts sometimes struggle programming for, and then they have to seek out of district placements in an approved private special education program per se. So there was a lot of state guidance for districts to consider when trying to put together plans for additional in-person learning for students with high needs. Currently, at all levels, the ECC, elementary, middle school, high school, and the community partnership program, we are like finalizing plans or looking at possibilities to increase live in-person instruction for our students with high needs. Question number 2, will additional live in-person learning be available to other students with disabilities? Again, this is a case-by-case basis because we are not blind to the fact there are several students who struggled with distance learning. So what we're looking to do once school begins is we're going to need to do some baseline data collection to try to look at like regression data to see which students regressed over this closure so then we can be responsive moving forward. What if my child has difficulty wearing a mask? Before I comment on this, because we had a conversation with the director and the assistant director from the Fairfield Public Health Department today on this, among several discussions with them, additional guidance is coming from the state in terms of mask wearing. Currently, as we stand today, and again, as you all know, guidance from the state has been coming in at a fast and furious pace. So, you know, what I say today conceivably could change in the next couple days if the guidance changes. But as of today, wearing masks, it is a requirement. It is an absolute requirement unless there is a medical exemption that the child has some significant medical reason why he or she is unable to wear a mask. From what we're told by public health officials, this should be rare, but that is up to a doctor. And then once we receive letters, we review them with our health department. What I will say, the guidance on mask wearing changed from July to August in terms of the preschool population of students, our ECC students. They are not required to wear masks, but we are strongly encouraging them to wear masks, and we are going to do some, you know, teaching and educating of students and sending parents resources on the importance of wearing masks. It is one of the most powerful mitigating strategies to decrease or to control the transmission of COVID-19 from one person to another. So a lot more information about mask wearing will be forthcoming. We do understand some of our high needs students may have difficulty with masks, wearing masks for extended periods of time. We will implement additional mitigating strategies for those students while programming and providing some direct teaching around that. And some of the additional mitigating strategies that we may use are the use of face shields, in addition to masks, the use of physical barriers like a plexiglass, barrier between the student and the teacher, increasing social distancing where possible. So those are just a few mitigating strategies that we can use. What will my child's daily schedule look like? I don't know. The ECC, is Kristen Bruno with us tonight? Okay, the ECC schedule, they have for their hybrid, they have an AM session and a PM session. So it's very similar to you know, how it runs when they're in person. Wednesdays will be a day for the hybrid plan where PPTs will take place. They may do some child find activities. They may post, you know, specials or some activities that parents can use to engage their children on Wednesdays. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday will be a very similar day for ECC students as if we are in session. Elementary, I don't know if any of you have seen the sample elementary schedule that has been posted on the website, but you know, elementary schools are broken into an AM cohort and a PM cohort where, you know, just the AM cohort, they have the live instruction where they're in school from 8:45 to 11:30, and then they have the afternoon remote session. And they have it broken down in intervals of time. So, for example, 8:45 to 9 is arrival, 9 to 9:30 will be a morning meeting and a daily social emotional learning activity. 9:30 to 10:30 may be language arts block, 10:30 to 11:15 may be math, and so on and so forth. So the elementary cohort schedule is pretty clear on breaking down what a daily schedule may look like for them. For the middle school, I'm going to ask John Goodison to just explain a little bit what a sample middle school calendar may look like in a hybrid model.
Sure. So a little bit differently than the elementary school, the middle school is looking at having an cohort A and a cohort B going live in person to the building 2 days a week, 2 days of remote learning, and then Wednesdays being a remote day for all, where within that, as to Mr. Mancusi's earlier comments, we would be looking at implementing at least 50% of the IEP service grid live and in person, either through the time in their school or live remote learning through video instruction. The remaining time would be asynchronous. Some examples of that would be posted videos, posted assignments. Our goal really is, though, that we're setting our students up during their live time that they're reasonably able to reinforce, enrich, and extend the work they're doing in live session while they're working asynchronously on that remaining time.
Thank you, John. The high school schedule is similar to that and how it operates as the middle school with the cohorts on. There's 2 cohorts, 2 days a week, and then the Wednesday is the remote day. And then the CPP, Gail Donowitz will just explain briefly what a CPP sample schedule may look like.
Yeah, as my colleagues have said, we're going to be using the facilities the best that we can, and so we're looking at the CPP continuing to work on the goals in independent living and transition. However, we will not be in the community setting to begin. What we are going to do is we're going to have space both at Ludlow High School and at Ward High School, so a little bit different. And as time goes on, we're looking to incorporate our students back into the community settings, but we're going to have to vet those settings to make sure that they are safe just in terms of COVID-19. The day will begin as it was, so it begins at 7:30. And I'm not sure, Rob, if you want me to go through what a sample day might look like right now, or
Sure.
wait. Okay.
Well, there is another question on that, but yeah, you could do it now.
Okay. So an example of that begins, again, these are transition services. So they're going to be delivered individually and based on a student's IEP. So the schedule that I'm giving to you right now is genuinely a sample schedule. But the students will begin at 7:30 with independent living, looking at doing some yoga, some journaling, some understanding of how to ground themselves for the day, how to be healthy and really focus on health. When we're in the community setting, we do that in different facilities. Then we will, at 8:15, go into a math lesson, for example, and that again is dependent upon a student's individualized. And then at 9:30, the social worker will be conducting a group. So a social skills group, again, based on the goals and objectives. We do have a book club that's a part of our CPP model. And so students are engaged in reading as well as in discussing. So we're looking at the social skills as well as the functional reading skills. So students actually get to participate in a book club. And for some of our students, when they graduate, they actually continue with book clubs. And then working on writing goals. We're going to have lunch bunch with music and having students actually plan their own, because we're actually looking at increasing the independence, and music is certainly part of the adult life. After lunch, looking at the vocational goals and objectives, along with having some speech pushing with the group. I do want to say that as time goes on, working into the school setting and seeing what classes, if any, were available that we could actually have our students participate in as an audit, so that they can continue in the areas of their interest that support their transition.
Thank you, Gail.
You're welcome.
Okay, question number 5. What if my child's IEP services cannot be met as written in a hybrid learning or remote learning? If because we are obligated, and because there was no waiver to IDA requirements, and we're obligated to write IEP, the IEP as written, which is written as if we're in school live full time. We all just attended a state meeting Thursday afternoon. There is an attachment to the IEP. It's called the Learning Model IEP Implementation Plan. What that means, because we don't have a waiver and we're still held, responsible for meeting the needs of our students' IEP goals and objectives and service times. The state does recognize, however, that under the current circumstances and the situation, as if you're in hybrid or if you're in a remote learning setting, the way in which you implement the IEP or services may look different. So in consultation with the parents, we would complete the Learning Model IEP implementation plans to discuss how best, or to determine how best to implement the IEP goals and objectives. This would be done in consultation with parents. This could be done in a PPT, doesn't necessarily have to be done in a PPT, but any service that is going to be delivered differently than intended as the IEP is written, a Learning Model IEP implementation plan will be completed. So there's more information on that to come, but basically the bottom line is, if we're not able to implement the IEP as written in full for various factors, in consultation with parents, we'll complete the Learning Model IEP implementation plan attached to the IEP, and still monitor progress on goals and objectives, and we will be in compliance with the IDA requirements of IEP implementation. My child has a 504. How is that being handled, or how is that different? That's a very interesting and a very good question. The state has been extremely quiet in terms of guidance on 504 plans. So what I say to that is 504 plans, the accommodations that your child is entitled to per his or her 504 plan will continue to be, active no matter what model of learning they participate in at this time. Question number 8, in hybrid model, will students be pulled out of classes on in-school days? This depends on the type of service, the amount of service that your child gets, but it is very possible that some live pullout services may occur when your child is in school. That is an individual student answer. But there is a possibility that students will be getting special education and related services during the school day when they are in attendance. My child only receives 1 hour of service per week. How will that be accommodated? I'm sorry. How will that be accommodated? Your child will receive that 1 hour of service per week. If we go with the 50-50 model, that means 50% of the services, a minimum of 50% of the services will be live, whether that's in person or whether that's remote, depends on whether the student is participating in the hybrid model. But if the student could, if they're participating in the hybrid model, conceivably get that 1 hour of service, say it's speech or OT. Well, it wouldn't be just OT, but say an hour of speech, they could get that hour of speech during live in-person learning when they're in school. Doesn't mean that's the only way, but it depends. An hour a week of service, of live service, is a lot easier to implement in a shortened day than somebody who gets more intensive services. Question number 10. In hybrid, will push-in still take place, and how is that impacted by social distancing? That is another very good question. We're all driven right now by maintaining safety and health of students, staff, and families. So in terms of service delivery, push-in services are still possible if able to deliver while maintaining, appropriate social distancing. Student services can be classroom-based, but the direction that we've given the schools is that, in terms of site of service, it should be as in the IEP, with cohorting to reduce the amount of movement for students throughout the building, if able to deliver services in a classroom-based setting, that is okay to do. However, if the team of educators and parents feel that it is in the individual student's best interest to deliver the services as indicated in the IEP, that's an individual, based decision, and that will be for all students in terms of site. We want people to be aware of the concept and in the forefront of their thinking, the concept of cohorting of students, limiting movement and exposure to the greatest extent possible to students outside of their cohort. So that's where that idea of classroom-based services, if it makes sense for the student to go that route, if it's determined by the educators and the parents that there's a more appropriate mode, that's an individually based decision. How will push-in services look in remote learning? That is a really good question. Push-in services in a remote learning may look like a one-to-one live setting, live instructional setting between the teacher and the student. It may be a live instructional setting between the teacher and a small group of students. It may be a lesson that is partially live and then followed by some asynchronous follow-up reinforcement activities. Again, it depends on the specific of the service, the needs of the student, and everything will be individual. I will tell you, it is our belief that as much, and I think the input that I received from a lot of you throughout the past 5 months is that obviously live in person instruction is preferred, but we had a lot of struggling learners throughout the winter, but once they were introduced to live interaction or live video instruction remotely, their engagement increased, they became more independent, and even their teachers commented that the student really responded to that. Number 12, will paraprofessionals and ed trainers be available to students on Google Meets during remote days? That was something that we did during distance learning. So yes, that is a viable possibility that for specific students, they may receive additional support from paraprofessionals or ed trainers on remote learning days. How does Fairfield define high need students? That definition came directly from page 1 of addendum 3 of the Adapt, Advance, and Achieve document from the Connecticut State Department of Education, how they define student with high needs. So please define how the CPP program will work. Will they be hybrid as well? Gail, I know you already talked a little bit about this, but do you want to just touch a little bit more on this question?
Certainly. At this point in time, we're looking at the CPP being on the ground as much as possible. Hybrid is a possibility, but we certainly will be at least hybrid or more in terms of on the ground. They will be following the high school schedule at the very least. And so Wednesdays will be a remote learning day, but they will have 5 days a week of programming.
Okay. I'll say to any of my colleagues, particularly my coordinators, if at any time you want to chime in and add to my response, I'm not saying you have to, but don't feel bashful if you have something to say. So question number 15. Spring distance learning was difficult. How is it going to be different? What, in addition to live video, is changing? Well, what I will say is this. I think the biggest difference from from distance learning in the spring to what the state is calling remote learning now. The biggest difference is the quantified expectation across the district that all special education students will receive a minimum of 50% of their services live, whether that's live in person if they're in school or through the use of live video instruction or interaction. So what that is automatically going to do, it's going to increase the consistency of service delivery across the schools. What we learned is that there were gaps in that service delivery, that asynchronous and synchronous split throughout the spring. Some schools adhered to that much, cleaner than others. Some were much more comfortable and some did not have that comfort level. I think over time, we're in a different place now than we were in March and April. It's 6 months later almost. So I think our capacity and our comfort level to interact with our students through a live video format versus, just through an audio format or a Google Chat format has changed. So I'm expecting that consistency of service and increase in student engagement remotely will result as of the change. In full remote learning, will there be separate special education teachers, or will special education support be given by their home school? Another excellent question. I've been asked this multiple times. Parent surveys were just completed or just closed yesterday, I believe. Staff surveys, I believe, were closed the day before. So I haven't seen those numbers yet from IT, but the hope is, yes, your students will be serviced by staff from their home school. But until we know numbers, that's not a given yet, but that is definitely the hope. For other services such as OT, PT, and speech, will the specialist be from the home school? Similar to my answer in the question above, yes, of course, we would like the service provider to be the person who is services students in your child's school. But again, based on the numbers, that's to be determined. My child is a CLC learner, but needs to fully participate in remote learning for health reasons. Will there be a special CLC class in remote learning? At this time, I can't say yes or no to that, but what I can say is that a learning model IEP implementation plan will be developed in consultation with the parent and the team to individualize the student's needs and services in a remote model based on, the student's goals and objectives. So whether or not there is a special CLC class just for remote learners, I don't know, but there will be an individualized plan to implement the IEP, because again, we're obligated to implement the IEP. We don't have a waiver under IEDEA for that, so we will be working with you how best to do that. I apologize for the typo on question 18. I forgot the E in learner. All right. Question 19. For families who choose full remote learning, will there be SEL opportunities? Will SEL opportunities look different? And if so, how? That's another excellent example. A coordinated set of SEL opportunities or activities, however we want to serve, stated, are going to be provided to students throughout the year. It is one of the priorities of the state, one of the priorities of the Fairfield School District, and one of the priorities of every district in Connecticut's school district's reopening plan on addressing the social emotional needs, not only of students, but of staff and of parents. So what that might look like for a student, it might look like a one-to-one Google Meet a couple times a week with a counselor or a school psychologist. It might be a small group counseling service or support group for students or families. Part of, we're going to be initially focusing on trauma. So part of the outcome of the screening, the universal screening, is to identify, it's to re-engage all families and students, but to really identify the ones who we had the most difficulty contacting with or staying engaged with during the closure, and then, individualizing plans of support so we can get them back engaged with their school community so they can progress. Question 20. Will social groups with peers still be assembled? Absolutely. Question 21. My IEP has specified hours for para-ed trainer support. Will that be through live video, Google support in the remote learning model? Can the para join the class calls with students? Yes, that is a possibility. Paras and ed trainers can be utilized, and however we see fit to support the growth of your children. Paras or ed trainers usually do not join calls with students. I'm sorry. Can they join like a Google Meet with students? Yes, if the teacher and the parent feels the support provided is appropriate. If I'm reading this correctly, can the para join class calls with students? Yeah, I don't see why not, and I'm sorry I'm stumbling on that one. I don't see why not if it's going to support the student. Moving on to question 22. My child did not have a one-to-one para support, but now needs additional help and support in remote learning days. How can we obtain this support? I think the best way to address that concern is if your child, when they're in school, does not require that additional para or one-on-one support, to succeed or to progress, but they're struggling with remote learning, I would contact the school, whether that's your child's case manager, the principal, to set up, you know, a PPT, or it doesn't even have to be a PPT. It could just be a Google Meet, just to discuss your concerns and to see if there's additional supports that can be provided when your child is in a remote learning situation versus in school. 23, describe how students who have an accommodation for extra time to complete work or tests will be accommodated in both hybrid and learning scenarios. Again, those are accommodations that on IEPs or 504 plans that students still have available to them. Defining, I always like to define what extra time means, so we're all understanding the specifics of the meaning of extra time. So again, I would reach out to your child's school if it's not specified specifically in the IEP of the 504 plan to talk about how best we're going to provide that accommodation to your son or to your daughter. Students with preferential seating on IEPs and 504 plans. Who is getting assigned seating in each classroom? Will preferential seating be in place day one? The answer to that is yes. And if it's not, you should call your school principal and bring it to their attention so that can be rectified immediately. Question number 25. If special education students are coming 4 days, are they only receiving special education services on the extra days? Are they attending any regular classes with the alternate cohort? This question's a little tricky to answer. When we're looking at students in need of additional live in-person services, there's a lot of different scenarios that we're working through right now. Students, to the greatest extent possible, we do not want to cross cohorts. We do not want to expose students to 2 different cohorts, but in trying to figure out how our students with high needs and, you know, other case-by-case vulnerable population of students would receive additional support, whether that be in person or through live video. You know, more details on that are to come. Okay, we are on question 26. Will the CLC experience be different? What will it look like? Another excellent question. The CLC experience will in many ways be similar, but in many ways it will be different than we're used to. There's going to be much more PPE available to students and staff in the CLCs. We're going to exercise or practice social distance as much as we can with a CLC population. We will be utilizing additional mitigating strategies, as I kind of touched upon before. And in terms of our small group instructional work with students and staff, the small group, I envision, you know, I could still envision some possibilities where there could be like dyads or students can work in pairs with instructional support and additional PPE and mitigating strategies. But again, we're still obligated to implement IEPs as they are written. If the IEPs are determined on a case-by-case basis for a specific student that the way it is written is not going to be possible to implement under the current circumstances, under COVID-19 circumstances, we will have to complete a learning model IEP implementation plan and articulate clearly how we intend then to meet the IEP goals and objectives. I want to, you know, I thank you all for your patience. I know I'm sitting here answering all these questions that come. Please, insert questions in the box if you have any additional comments, or if I'm not answering your questions, you know, exactly how you would like to hear them. I sincerely want to be able to work with each of you, and I want to meet your needs, or at least give you the honest information that we have, and that's what we're trying to do. Number 27, describe rules for wearing masks. My child will not wear a mask. Do I need a medical note? We briefly touched on this. Wearing masks is an absolute requirement. There's only two situations in which a mask is not required. And right now, that is for students who are enrolled in the preschool program or the ECC. But in consultation with public health officials, we are strongly going to encourage mask wearing for ECC students. We're going to be doing a lot of educating around the importance of that, and really that it is one of the primary ways to stop the spread of COVID-19. So, and if children are unable to wear masks, we're going to work with students. As I said, for a student who might have significant intellectual disabilities or some global developmental deficits, we're going to do some direct teaching, or we're going to write some like direct, discrete trial programs around personal hygiene issues. And we're going to teach the student. In addition to that, while we're doing that, we're going to be implementing additional mitigating strategies and use of additional personal protective equipment. A medical note is needed for a medical exemption. Yes. If your child has a specific medical condition that requires an exemption from wearing a mask, a doctor's note is noted. I will say on several occasions, public health officials said if students have a medical condition or have some kind of compromised respiratory system, even prior to COVID-19, that, that is a conversation about potentially providing services remotely. That is just reporting what public health officials I've heard say on several occasions, but mask wearing is a requirement. But we will work with students and families. We do understand that it's difficult. And we also will implement, if necessary, additional mask breaks. So we can, we could see if we can make progress in that. I will tell you, we had a small cohort of students receive live related services this year as part of our extended year program. And I know it was only short periods of time, sometimes up to 2 hours, sometimes it was 30, 40 minutes at a pop. But our students, they pleasantly surprised all of us in their ability to keep their masks on. They may have needed some coaching or some additional support, but by and large, the students did a nice job. Will a student work? For CLC, is class size spacing affected by the number of support staff? We're looking at CLC space and student space. Again, understanding that we do have IEPs to implement. A lot of our CLC students, they are included in general ed settings throughout the day. They may be different parts of the day that certain students are in, certain students are out. They may be getting related services at different times. So we are looking at the number of students who conceivably could be in a CLC classroom at a specific time, and we'll adjust accordingly. Will a student work with only one para ed trainer, or will they rotate? That is another excellent question. In, you know, again, back to that concept of cohorting and limiting student movement and exposure to, you know, people that, to more people than they need to, it's likely that paras or ed trainers are going to be paired up with specific students in a CLC setting. But I don't want to say that that's going to be the sole case, because, you know, people are in and out at times due to you know, if they can't come to work for whatever reasons. But yes, that's going to be a consideration. Question number 30. Is there an opportunity for students to meet the special education teacher and or tour their classroom / CLC in person? I'm assuming that is prior to the start of school. What I will say is school buildings right now are being, you know, set up for school to start. There is a lot of equipment and a lot of work being done to get those ready. So we will get back to you on if they could come in person. What we could do, and if one of my coordinators could just jot this note down, that would be great. What we could do is we could arrange, at the very least, a Google Meet with your child's team or key players in your child's team and you and your child, as kind of an introduction to the school year. Will aquatics therapy program take place? You all know, or I assume you all know, that, you know, Mike Abraham has retired. Right now, we are not going to be running that program at the start of school. We are going to be monitoring that because we know how valuable that program is and how, you know, popular that program is and how our students enjoy that, but we're not going to be starting that right now. Transportation. Will there be extra transportation options for students who stay for extended days or time within a week? What I would say to that question, if I'm interpreting it correctly, and if I'm not, just put a comment or an additional question in the chat box. If students are going to be in school for additional in-person time and they're students with high needs, yes, transportation will be part of that. It's not going to be like transportation will be part of that. We may ask parents if they would volunteer to do the transporting, as is being done now, but we're not going to hold back on services if a parent, you know, if both parents are at work or if that's a hardship. That's not something we will do. Question number 33, students who use the elevator, will there be cleaning and access plan in place? If students are in the elevator, we will make sure the elevator is cleaned before and after the students use the elevator. And if a coordinator could point that question out, because that's the first question like that I've gotten, and I would like to pass that on to Angeles. All right. Question number 34. I requested a PPT and was told that you would have to wait for the new year. How are PPTs being scheduled now? PPTs are being scheduled remotely for the time being. We're going to be doing them primarily over Google Meet. We can schedule PPTs at any time. There was only a short period in the beginning of March and April when staff was just acclimating to distance learning, where, I mean, most places in the state just put a pause on PPTs so we can maintain our focus on getting, yes, yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You have to switch the slide, though.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm having trouble reading my screen, so I'm...
You went too far. Go back one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you, Colleen. Yeah, so back in the winter, initially we paused PPTs so folks can just focus their attentions on getting acclimated to distance learning. So, but PPTs are resuming. So if you want a PPT, I would say, we can have PPTs as of, they're resuming. We have PPTs going on this summer, so there's no pause on PPTs anymore. So if you're if you're requesting a PPT and you're getting denied, you should not be getting denied. Question number 35. My child was being evaluated when quarantine began in March. You had PPT 1. When can I expect the evaluations to pick up again? And when can I expect the follow-up PPT? I will say the mandated initial eval timeline will resume September 8th. We have 45 school days in which to complete initial evaluations from the date of the referral to the date of IEP implementation. So that timeline kicks back in on the first day of school. So wherever your child, is within that process on that timeline, you can kind of plan out the latest potential date that PPT2 will convene or prior to that, so they can implement the IEP. What I will say is we do have a backlog of evaluations. We are prioritizing. We're coming up with a prioritization plan to complete those. But again, no waiver of IDEA requirements, so we must adhere to evaluation timelines. So, number 36, compensatory services. How is the district assessing potential regression? Will the district consider compensatory services if they find students have regressed from the spring? What I will say to this is, in terms of measuring regression, we will ask our staff within the first few weeks of school to do some baseline assessments to see where students are on progress on goals and objectives from where they were in March, so we would be able to measure regression. Because this was a global pandemic and we were closed, it was the governor's order to close schools. It is not a compensatory service situation. However, if your child has specific needs or has particularly suffered through this pandemic, what I would say is speak to your team, discuss this in a PPT on how we can best meet the needs of your student moving forward or of your child moving forward. Does the IEP change if we select remote learning and services are delivered both synchronous and asynchronous? Does the 50-50 approach need to be reflected in the IEP? The 50-50 approach should not be in the IEP. The 50-50 approach may be listed in your learning model IEP implementation plan, but the current and consistent guidance we continue to get from the state is that IEPs are to be written as if you are in school delivering services in person on a full-time basis. If that cannot be done, then the learning model IEP implementation plan will be completed, explain how services will be delivered, and attached to the IEP. In addition, we set the 50-50 approach with 50%, a minimum of 50% live video instruction or interaction between staff and students with disabilities, and 50% asynchronous support. So that isn't a state mandate, but you could put that into the IEP implementation plan. And then number 38. State mandates requiring a set of amount of time with typical peers, but time with a social focus and specials, for instance, may not be functional for some high-need students in these models. Do these students still need to participate in these classes if the team agrees it's not appropriate. What I would say, the PPT has the authority and has great authority in terms of decision making. If parents and staff do not believe that a service is appropriate anymore, the IEP can be revised. What I would say, though, and the direction or the guidance that I am going to give our special education staff is really any significant revision, such as decreasing time with non-disabled peers to an IEP, that was written with the idea that the student would be in school full-time, receiving services live in person. I would make through a learning model IEP implementation plan, because once we get through this pandemic and we come out the other end, we're going to want the IEP to still reflect what the team and the family felt was appropriate at the time, considering that it was going to be implemented live and in person full time. So with that, those were the 38 questions that we received. We will post those questions with responses. And if there's any additional questions that you have right now, I could take more questions and we can, again, post those online.
Thanks, Rob. My name's Kristen Vitale. I'm going to I've just been monitoring the chat along with Colleen. And I think that some questions in the chat have, I hope, been addressed by some of what Rob has said. Others, I think, obviously, we want more. We, all of us as a parent, would love to have a very much more specific answer to, that we might not get today. But big ones on here would be, there's this question of, high need students that might not already be identified because they're in the CLC. Those ones are obvious. How and when are parents going to find that out? How do they get that information in the next 3 weeks?
Our next step right now is because surveys have closed. We need to look at what staffing looks like, how many students are coming back versus how many students are not coming back and are going to be in remote. I'm hoping by the end of this week or the beginning of the next week, we continue to start, putting some concrete plans in place. But there are, and when I say concrete plans, there's a lot of conversation. And I understand and I appreciate that parents need to, know what's going on so they can plan for their child and they can plan their lives in terms of work. But we want to look at what our staffing is and make sure what we're planning we can deliver on. Because the worst thing would be to come out with a plan and then not be able to deliver on the plan that we provided. I understand time is of the essence. I get the sense of urgency. I feel the sense of urgency. And my hope is by sometime early next week, we will have some more definitive answers.
And
Rob, I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Christy.
Go ahead, Colleen.
I was going to say that I think one of the lingering questions, and I hear you saying the answer is no, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on this. Is that a determination that has to be made at PPT? Is this something that parents are going to hear about before school starts? Do they need to be affirmatively reaching out to their case managers to learn about this, or is the school district going to reach out to them in terms of planning cohorts and things like that?
Right now, I'm continuing additional conversations with principals on my thoughts in terms of implementing additional live in person for our students with high needs, and then additional communication with parents will go out through the special ed office.
Great.
Okay.
I think a similar question that I had down is, how are cohorts going to be determined in terms of special education? Are students going to be grouped together based on disability, based on classes they would have been in anyway? How is that going to work? And is the timing of a cohort say, for instance, an elementary student who does better in the morning versus the afternoon, is that going to be taken into consideration for individual students?
What I would say, and Dr. Parrish, if you wouldn't mind just talking briefly, and then I could specify it to special ed, how cohorting is going to be assigned.
Yes, Zakia Parrish, Executive Director of Operations and Processes. So the overlying determination for cohorts is going to be based on households. So that's what's going to be used to determine which cohort students are in, and that is so that students that are siblings are put in the same cohort with their other siblings at other schools.
So thank you. So if there is a request to deviate from that that process for a specific reason for a student with disabilities, I guess I would say reach out to me with the specifics of your case and your request, and we'll get back to you on that. I know I missed part of that question, Colleen, so if there's a part I missed, if you could repeat it.
I think part of the question was if a student has specific considerations in terms of a cohort or a group.
I see.
If that's something that would be taken into account.
What I will say is possibly, yes. The state has provided some guidance on cohorting of students with disabilities. For example, just a student or students who might get a certain service versus a constellation of a lot of services. It may be they may be able to be cohorted with a general education cohort. We're just similar service. They have similar services to limit students who are in and out of classes for different pullout services.
You can always reach out to your level coordinators too to have those conversations.
Thank you, John.
There's two specific groups of students who there is concern from the very beginning of the chat till now in the parent group. And the first is students who are deaf or hard of hearing, and how those students are going to learn in a hybrid model when people are wearing masks. And the other group is students who are receiving reading services like Wilson, and how that might be delivered remotely and if it's going to be delivered daily. So those are two specific questions, and they are obviously different, but it's sort of the same tenor to them that they're brought to students.
Okay, if I could take that in part. For students who are deaf or hard of hearing, we have ordered clear masks. We've ordered high quality clear masks that were approved by the Fairfield Health Department. So to the greatest extent possible, you can see somebody's mouth. I don't know. I've not worn one yet, so I don't know if they fog up, but that's the guidance that we've received also that's in the state documents to provide students who are deaf or hard of hearing with clear masks or shields. So we obviously to meet their needs. For students who receive Wilson reading daily, I will say the biggest difference between now and back in March is we are now obligated to provide services as written in their IEP. Understanding that there may be some restrictions due to, remote learning or the hybrid plan, but then we have the learning model IEP implementation plan to fall back on to still make sure students are getting services as written in their IEP. We are looking at how for students, for example, a Wilson student who might get services daily. In a hybrid plan, I would envision that student is going to get services daily, but it might be a combination of live in person and live, video. And in that case, the implementation plan would be filled out and attached because you are making that change based on the fact that school's not open for 5 full days.
Can I just jump back to the hard of hearing, the clear masks, and just to clarify that we would have enough masks, not necessarily for the children, but for all of the staff. I think
Yes.
the concern is that it's all staff in a school that a student might come into contact with. Okay.
We've ordered plenty of PPE, and we've ordered plenty of PPE with that specific population of students in mind.
Christy, I cut you off a few times. Did you have one that you wanted to ask?
I gotta, you go on, because I'll work on the next
Okay.
one.
Okay.
No, actually, you know what? I do have one. Let me approach this one. So, and I think that we may have addressed this in different ways, but I want to put the question out there because it was frequently put into the chat. And that is that some parents felt that on the remote days, they really had, in remote learning, they really had to provide one-to-one service to their child. Their child could not access the program in remote. And if they don't necessarily meet all of the high needs list in addendum 3, what is there, like, how do we help those families? How do we help those students access the education, either help them in remote or with an alternative option?
An excellent question, and I'm sure that is on the minds of many parents, because I've heard that question several times. What I would say at this time is we know there are, the state clearly identified what they consider student with high needs to be. We know that there are other students or all other vulnerable populations of students whose needs we need to take a close look at. So that's where in the beginning of school, to be able to do some baseline assessments to measure what kind of regression or the extent of regression or the extent of difficulty a student asked or experienced rather in distance learning through the past several months so we can respond appropriately, we're going to do. We know there's a cohort of students who struggled with distance learning that we're gonna have to take a close look at. I know that might not be a vague answer, or that might not be a specific answer to please most parents, but it's an honest answer, and it's one that is on our radar.
Thank you, Rob. Can you talk about, is there a specific plan for social emotional learning in a remote, fully remote and or hybrid model? And is there a plan for executive functioning instruction and support in both a hybrid and fully remote model?
What I would say in terms of the executive functioning, many students have goals and objectives for executive functioning skills that will be implemented. In terms of a broad executive functioning program or delivery of instruction just around executive functioning skills, that is not in our plan right now for students who don't have those goals and objectives in their IEPs. In terms of the social emotional learning, again, that is a priority of the district, of the state for this year. It's actually part of the teacher evaluation this year to address student engagement, family engagement, social emotional learning. So, in addition to the screener that we talked about that we're going to complete, that's going to, measure the level of trauma experienced by students throughout the course of 6 months. We're also looking at the social emotional learning initiatives we have through the CASTLE framework, which the CASTLE framework, and I forget right now what CASTLE stands for. It's collaborative academic learning and emotional learning, but it's a framework of teaching kids particular competencies that exist in many of our initiatives in the district, like our DBT program at the middle school and high school, or like our Mind Up Mindfulness program at the elementary school. So what we're going to do this year, and it's going to be a focus this year, is to coordinate all our social emotional programming throughout pre-K through 12 plus throughout this year for parents, students, and teachers. So what that will look like potentially is we will be doing, this week, for example, tomorrow we're doing a self-help and a stress management and a self-care workshop for administrators. So administrators will be better equipped to support their teachers, to support their students. When teachers return, we're going to do the same type of workshop for them, so they can support their students and families. And then we're going to be scheduling again. I don't know if any of you were able to participate in any of our, our Thursday night parent, trainings or parent workshops or presentations, through Zoom last spring, but we're looking to do a lot more of that so we can continually support all three groups, but working on similar things. So there is a lot of good information on social emotional learning and on the district's re-engagement plan that is in the Fairfield document that was part of our reopening plan. And, I was able to chair the subcommittee that looked at re-engagement of students and families, and specifically SEL. And we had a broad range of representation throughout the district. And, we had Anna Wood, who's the former president of the system-wide PTAC, on that plan. And, Gail, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about restorative practices. I know that you and Anna worked on a PTAC grant on restorative practices. So it's some information to share that we're looking to bring to the district on a broader scale.
Robin, I'd be happy if this is Mike DeStefano, if you want me to talk a little bit about executive functioning a little bit and some of the social emotional as well.
Yeah, is Gail available to talk about?
I am. I don't want to talk over anybody, but yes.
Yeah, if you could just talk a little bit about.
A couple of things to just mention. We won't hear about it until closer towards the end of August, but with Anna and the committee, we actually created a proposal for a grant, a $15,000 grant that we're hoping to get that will support us in implementing restorative practices. I just want to back up a little bit before talking about restorative practices. And I think, Mike, you wanted to say a little bit as well. There's a lot that's been going on in our district. What has happened now with COVID and all of the disengagement is it's given us an opportunity, and you all as well, to think about what our needs are and look at what our practices are and put them all together, to actually say how much we believe in having positive relationships in our schools, how the social emotional component is the underbelly of our students functioning and to be able to learn and to come to school able to learn. And together we actually have an opportunity now, and restorative practices is actually a practice that came from understanding that we need to teach relationship skills, that the positive and how it is that we relate to each other is based on a huge understanding of what it is that we value most and how it is that we bring communities together. At the alternative high school in our district, at the Walter Fitzgerald campus, we've been operating with restorative practices, but know that that is something that's been happening across our globe and across the country. We've been fortunate in that a partnership with Joanne Freiberg, who was at the State Department of Education for many, many years, has been engaged with, and something that Rob has been working on, so that we could have training for our staff and for our students, as well as for families coming up in this school year. That's all part of the grant. But that goes along with looking at some of the practices that we've had and putting them in an order so that everybody has a more cohesive and supportive understanding of how it is that we handle engagement, how it is that we handle trauma, and most important, how it is that we handle the relationships within our community so that we're supporting our students to the best of our abilities together.
Thank you, Gail. Mike, if you could touch on the EF piece.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Stefano. So first, I just want to say that Rob, because of Rob's leadership, I really, and this is to Gail's point as well, I think, 3 years ago, Rob came to all of us and said, we really want to promote social emotional learning and executive functioning. So I think Fairfield's in a real good spot and compared to maybe other districts in the state. You have social emotional learning, executive functioning has really been a focus over the last several years. In fact, our consultation groups for DBT, we have the most in the tri-state area in Fairfield public schools, in our middle and high schools, in our alternative high school as well. So that's a great, and that's a tribute to Rob's leadership. I think that social emotional learning has been a focus. We, like Rob said, we spent a lot of time in our parent series working with parents in terms of training them in terms of executive functioning. I think we had 2 parent nights with almost 200 parents who attended over the 2 nights on executive functioning and how to work with your children at home. We had 2 nights or 3 nights on anxiety and social emotional learning with Dr. Leibowitz and Dr. Alec Miller. So our parents have received some training, and it sounds like we're going to continue that as well. And then in our high schools, we, all of the majority of our staff in the middle and high school level have had training in terms of social emotional learning, executive functioning. We have one of the best executive functioning coaches in the world, Peg Dawson, who's a consultant to the district, who has worked with many of our staff, and students and families are benefiting from that.
Thank you, Mike. I would just like to give a shout out to our Board of Education for supporting special education and supporting, the social emotional initiatives of the Fairfield Public Schools over the past several years. I do think we stand out among our peers, and I think it's because we're so lucky to have a board that supports us the way they do. So, thank you. Next question.
So I think we're I have a couple more, but I do think we need to head towards wrapping up, and I'm sure Christy has a couple wrap-up questions herself. But I think the question that I've seen a few times now, I've seen it from both high school parents who are asking, is it possible for my student to go to school 4 days a week? And from elementary school parents saying, is it possible for my student to have a longer day? Is that possible? And how is that determination going to be made if it is possible? I think the concern stems from wanting students to be in their assigned cohort with their peers, but then also receiving their pullout or individualized services separate from their classroom time.
What I would say right now, in terms of, we're looking at students with high needs and, the need to increase live in-person instruction for our neediest students, and looking at our other vulnerable populations right behind that, and how we can provide them additional support is going to be it's an ongoing analysis. I'm not going to be able tonight to say your high school student is going to be able to go 4 days a week, or that your elementary student is going to be able to go extended day. What I will say is, now that we have all the information back, like current information at least, and I realize that could change, but under current conditions, we know that we have a population of students that does best when they receive instruction live and in person. Knowing that, we want to keep the number of students in each school to 50%, because of cohorting and because of the health and safety needs that we need to adhere to, we're going to look at that. To the greatest extent possible, we know we have students who need additional services. We're working on that. I just can't right now tell you that on September 8th, Rob is going to be able to go to Ward High School for 4 days versus 2 and then get remote services. We're working with principals on identifying their students who need additional support. We've talked about this in the past about, at one point we had talked about an extended day, but that was under conditions that we weren't expecting to still, at least I wasn't thinking this far ahead, that we were going to still be in a pandemic where we were going to have cohorts of students. So we are looking at different options. Just what they are right now, I can't commit to that.
Thank you, Rob.
I think one thing that might be helpful, and again, if the answer isn't given tonight, if it's given this week, more of a sort of generalized timeline and clarification of, the easiest way for parents to find out what we've talked a lot about the fact that it's individualized. Reaching out to your case manager, copying your coordinator. How do they get there? Some parents are respectful and they sit back and they wait, and then they find out that they don't get the information they need. So what's the most efficient manner? By the end of this week, you think that you'll know the cohorts, and then by the end of next week, parents should, I'm throwing that out, but I'm saying to give parents some sort of a deadline that says, if you haven't heard from your team by this date and you have a significant concern, then reach out to them. I saw a question here to say, will every family have a chance to meet with their PPT team before school starts? I can't imagine that's even possible.
That would not be, that would be physically impossible.
Yes, but it may be possible for every parent to have an opportunity to speak to their case manager before school starts. And if that is a reasonable expectation or a reasonable possibility, how does a parent get there?
Sure. Well, I would hop in. I'm sorry, Rob, if I'm stepping on your toes. Our staff is not going to be back to work until the 28th. So this conversation would have to occur on or after the 28th of August, because our staff are still, despite all of them being connected and many of them even being in our chat box this evening, all of them still are technically on their summer vacation right now, even though it hasn't been much of a summer for anyone. So with that in mind, I think that what we can give tonight is a timeline of when we would be able to have more information out to parents about what these conversations are going to look like.
Yeah, what I was just going to say is my office will come out with a communication after I meet with my team and the principals with some more specific information to parents next week.
The other thing that I'll say is that we do have a copy of the questions in the comment bar, and so we will roll as many of those generalized ones into the FAQ that we put out after this.
Yes.
It's not just going to be the 38 questions that you see, but as many of the additional questions from in here that we can answer generally would be included.
We will answer every question that we're asked to answer as part of the FAQ, in addition to the 38 that we had.
And then, Rob, we have about a minute and a half left, so I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
The only thing I want to say is I can't wait till COVID-19 is a conversation about a past memory that we all remember where we were when. I know how hard this has been. Thank you for, your patience, for your support, for your partnership in getting through this. I truly, truly understand that this has gotten beyond frustrating, and we just want it to be over, and it's not over. We are here for you, whether it feels that way or not. We will continue to be here to do the best we can on behalf of your students. We want to continue to partner with you to support your children the best we can. And, honest to God, we wake up at night and think, how can we make this work for our students with disabilities and our families? That will continue to be our mission as long as I'm the director of the Fairfield Public Schools. And we will be in touch with more specific information. I hope you all have a great night, and thank you.
Night. Thank you very much.